uh, Council Special Committee on Childcare. Let me see who is here. And actually, as part of that, I'll read our motion on meeting electronically. Pursuant to Governor Lee's Executive Order number 78 regarding electronic meetings, I make a motion that this committee meeting agenda constitutes essential business of the Metropolitan Council and that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Judy, could you
I move
move
to
that?
I move to accept that motion.
All right, and Christy, could you second?
I second that motion.
Awesome, thank you. Now let me go down the roll and see who's here. Judy is here. Saya is not here. She said she wouldn't be here, I believe. Councilmember Allen. Emily is here. Erica is here. Lisa said she's like closing on a house, I think, and couldn't be here. Amy? No. Farah, are you here?
She is not. She's actually in another meeting.
Okay, and Belva, you're here?
Yes, sir.
And Melanie is here. All right. All right, let me, thanks for being here. Let me start by, I think our main goal today is to get us moving closer to having a report to present to the vice mayor and the council and the public. And so I really want us to look at the logistics of that. And I know that we were just talking about the Google folder, which I've got on another computer, but I haven't logged into it here. Has anybody logged into it successfully? I was not able to, and then kind of bugged Councilmember Allen, and she sent it through to me and accepted my request. So I'm in, but I think she made me editor, so I think I can go in and add everybody, and we'll do that immediately after the meeting. Right now, there's just a kind of a framework of our different subsections on there that we can kind of plug stuff into if we need to. So, I mean, we're at the point where we want to, take what we've learned and what suggestions we've come up with and include them in the report. Or in each section. How are we thinking that is going to look like for some consistency in terms of like just trying to think of like within each section? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but in terms of like, the first section might be a summary of like where we're at. And then a section of goals or objectives or recommendations. And I guess within those two things, go ahead.
I was going to say in the sort of in the data section, I do have something written that kind of summarizes what's available in Nashville right now, just from the, from the website information we've been able to gather. And then the folks on the data team talked a little bit about including not the whole thing, but some links to some key information so that people who might be reading it but would like to understand a little bit more about the scope of the situation, not just in our county, but in the United States. So including some of those just links to develop awareness. And then it felt like some sort of acknowledgement of the local examples of early care partnerships that we already see in place as like a background piece.
Okay, that sounds good. Within the data section or overall?
I was thinking that would be in the data section because it's already
Okay.
part of what's happening. But certainly can be pared down because I think we want to focus on the on the what's next, although you have to get buy-in on the what's now.
Fair enough.
And I would love to hear Belva's ideas on, because I remember last time you had some like, we got to hit it concisely, have our priorities, you have people's attention for a second. And I tried to take notes last time, but Belva, what are your thoughts on what this report should be? And because you were on so right, like hit it concisely, make a point, get out of there. What are the points we want to make?
It's just a good thing I read the minutes from last time, so I should remember what I said. I say it in the moment and I don't always remember, but last time this is what I said.
Yeah.
But we talked about really recruitment and retention of qualified staff, talked about the pay parity pieces, talked about raising awareness in the community of the critical importance of early education, the early brain development pieces that are so very critical to us. To people investing and people understanding that there is value and there is much more value. This is just not a warehouse of children. This is not just a babysitting experience, but this is a foundational place where we build the young minds and we build experiences for children and for families, which is why we live in the Head Start model. And in similar models where we understand, lots of other folks are figuring that out. And really, the third thing I said last time was really supplying funds for extending services for various partnerships and really enhancing quality. That was the essence of that third piece. So thank you to the minute taker who took such good notes.
That's me.
but really those pieces still remain and will continue to remain relevant, and the issues certainly as we see them in terms of recruiting and retaining investments from the community, but also retaining qualified staff as well, which makes it very difficult for the early Head Start, which is the 0 to 2 up to 3 years of age, because people's like, well, they just babies, I don't really want to, I want to be known as a teacher. I want to be known as an educator. I want to be known as a nanny who rocks babies all day. And there's a perception issue there. And we call them brain builders. Because that's what they do it there. So it's all about those kinds of packages that help communities understand, investors understand, our government entities understand, and everybody understand how important it is to build those foundations prior to birth. And then those first 5 years are critical. And just to get folks to understand that is so important to what we're trying to do here.
Amen.
Right.
I think our report just needs to be Belva talking.
Sounds good. All right, and so I've got different sections as this is what Berkeley put in the sections in terms of organizing the document as a whole. Executive summary at the beginning, and then an introduction. And maybe that's where some of the data, the here's where we are is introduced. Then home-based childcare, employer-based childcare, school-based, church or empty metro building-based childcare, and then funding and conclusions and recommendations. I don't know that that's exactly what the same necessarily. I feel like we're missing some stuff there. And employment, which would include, you know, pay and recruiting and retaining and qualifications.
I think talking about pay for early childhood educators is so important. Yeah.
I agree.
I feel like, was there some talk, and Erica, maybe you're part of this group, or Belva, was there some talk that the work that was happening at United Way was taking on the quality and the pay piece of the conversation? Is there something that we could reference? Because we don't want to leave it out, but I think that's why we didn't focus on it as much.
Yes, and Melanie is also a part of that committee. So United Way Blueprint for Early Success is, we do have a working group that is focusing on salary parity and teacher pay. And we are, and Melanie will be able to add that in within about the next month or so. That committee is also putting together maybe a report as well, you know, around that information. So we've been doing some kind of research, some surveys with childcare directors and early childhood educators as well. So I think that would be something to reference, and even possibly if we wanted to do some type of convene or some type of public, you know, offering, sharing this information publicly. I think doing it in partnership with United Way Blueprint for Success would be really strategic, because they're also on a similar timeline as us. You know, one thing I was thinking of as well as I'm listening for this, because there's so many challenges in the early childhood education space. You can write 5 books, you know, or multiple books about all the things that need to change and improve. I think, you know, for this particular report, it would be really great to really focus our minds on the vantage point of Metro Council, right? Or Metro government. What can we do? What can we suggest? What we can advocate for in this space? Versus like, what are all the problems with childcare in the state of Tennessee? Because that's like, or all the problems with childcare, and even in Nashville, because there's. So I think we could focus on, yeah, the power that council has to be able to move in this space.
I think that's appropriate. I don't know that that should be the whole of the report, because, you know, part of it is we have so many resources that are out there, and, you know, we're not looking at Metro, you know, taking over those. So I think you know, making the public a public piece, but making the public aware of many things, and, you know, the different resources that are out there, the different nonprofits that are working on things, and not to, you know, co-opt their work, but have a public or governmental way to make sure that that's easily accessible to the public. And then, you know, in terms of Metro government, I mean, you know, there are different options in terms of having somebody, having a staff person or a department, you know, or sub department that kind of helps facilitate all those things. It helps coordinate and connect different people in the private and nonprofit world. And, you know, in terms of subsidies, in terms of facilities, both, are there any government facilities, and are there any, you know, is there a way for, you know, Metro to, on its website, list the, you know, here are some facilities, or here are some churches that are open to, you know, using some space for this. You know, and Metro Council can promote better pay and retention and recruitment in those regards. But, you know, since it's mostly nonprofit and private daycares that we're talking about, I mean, they can't, I don't know to what extent they can mandate it. So, well, I think, you know, in terms of recommendations, Metro Council and Metro government could definitely be included. I don't know if limiting it to that is the best.
Especially if
But
we're
that's my thought.
hoping, yeah, especially if we're hoping there'll be a what's it called, like a PR press release or something about it, then
Right.
we do want information that, and we want to have some kind of action item. If somebody reads this and says, oh, wow, I didn't realize this is such a need, I want to help, you know,
Right.
have a way for them to immediately click somewhere to help.
Yeah. Like maybe there should be, and I don't know if this is within one of the sections already named, but like a resources section. And maybe it's an appendix. And then we can clarify what, you know, like if they want to donate money, here's what these different nonprofits do. And if you want to tailor your, you know, financial contribution to this type of action, here's where you should give it. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I would just, and I would be curious. I know Melanie has a lot more, and Elisa's not here, but she has a lot more experience in this space in terms of working with some kind of collective impact groups. I guess the reason why I made that suggestion is that there are multiple other organizations that are doing very similar things. And I think if we can collaborate versus like having to write something that another like Blueprint for Success is doing the asset mapping, doing the resource guide. Childcare Tennessee has their own you know, work that they're doing. And so I guess my suggestion or my thought process is it gets confusing if everybody's doing the same thing and then you actually end up not knowing where to go. And so I don't know what you know feel about that, Melanie, but I'm hoping that Metro Council, this committee is pretty new to the landscape, right? So the Blueprint for Success has been going on for a very long time. Childcare Tennessee has been going on for a very long time. So I would hate for us to like reinvent the wheel and, you know, not acknowledge the work that's been going on for years that other entities have been doing. That's kind of my thought process behind it.
That makes sense. And I think kind of, especially since there's so much out there, kind of helping call it and make it simpler to navigate is a goal that I would think would be important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would think that, and the word that comes to my mind is repackage. That we repackage what information we do have, because we've got a wealth of knowledge. And when I think of what I think is our charge, then we certainly want to, as Simon Sinek says, start with the why. Why is this an important issue that we need to make sure that is important to take our time to consider and to invest time and push for resources. So why is that important? So you talk about the brain science and not at a very cursory but relevant level. So to be able to pull that piece, and then as we talk about what our population is in terms of how many children out there do we have, how many are in childcare, and some of the resources we just talked about already have that. So again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we just need to make sure that we are pulling some relevant information that folks can at a glance say, wow, we see the magnitude of the issue. And then once we do that, then they will be open to saying, whoa, we need to do something about that. And of course, we're going to have some ideas in terms of what we can do about it in Metro Nashville. And so those are just my thoughts on a way sort of to package and present it. We don't need to have a long diatribe, dissertation, or none of that. But we need to get to the point, amplify what the issues are. Here are ideas, which is why we've come together, I think, to really talk about what do we do about the issue. We say there's one, so we articulate what that is, how we know that's the issue, and then what we do about that. And we look at leveraging messaging Certainly awareness is a key takeaway that folks will now know more about early learning and early childhood development than perhaps they did before this group. And then what kinds of opportunities for expansion, and what might that look like? And what do we need to make that happen? What already exists, where are the gaps and needs? And if we package that, that sounds like a long dissertation, and I just said we didn't want one, right? But we do want to be able to package that in a way that folks will be able to get the point, that it is clear, that it is succinct. Much like my conversations, they don't tend to be succinct, but being able to just package that in a way that they get the message and say, wow, this is an issue about which we need to do something. And I think if we accomplish that, we definitely have accomplished what we said. And I see some amens in the corner, but anyway, so that's my 2 cents worth.
I agree. That makes a lot of sense.
I was just gonna, I agree with everything that was just said. You know, I think the part that would be kind of the piece that I think, kind of to your point, Erica, that this group could share is here's all these great resources and work that's been done. We know the research, but yet the problem still remains. Yesterday, with everything else that was in the news, I have not circled back to dig through, but the president, my understanding, released his kind of next level of information around significant, hopefully what will become funding around early childhood education. So the part 1 that was released a week or 2 ago of his plan was about the physical infrastructure, which makes me think what we're talking about here. What are churches or city-owned buildings? However, the other, anybody that's in this work knows that's only a piece of the puzzle. So you need the space, and if it's free, that's wonderful and that helps, but that still does not allow you to operate a high quality center with current resources available. So that second piece of the president's plan around the human infrastructure is critical. So I'm hopeful that that level of detail is now out from what I saw in some of the headlines. But I just think that's, again, the unique piece that this group can bring is even if we have physical space, it doesn't mean we have anyone to operate it or anyone to work in it. And that's really the challenge. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it is a piece. And so I think if this group, to Erica's point, could kind of tie some of the, because there's all these groups in town that are working on a piece of it, but yet there is not yet one way that we've all quite figured out how to work together.
That makes sense. I may reach out to like Congressman Cooper's office and see what they can help me understand about the infrastructure. I mean, the infrastructure piece and the not CARES Act, but I forget what the latest stimulus package was for coronavirus. But there's money in that too, and you know, I've seen the highlights of it, but I haven't dug into the, you know, how we could access those funds.
Yeah,
and
like
what? Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, Melanie, as a center, you know, do you get information on how to access these funds? I mean, we see the headlines, like there's funding. Do we need to help people figure out how to get it, how to access it?
Yeah, so yes, we have received some dollars in the past. Unfortunately, there is from the plan from December that was approved and passed, and the most recent plan, there are dollars, but we are not yet able to access them. So I think to your point, you know, you see it in the headline as a consumer or a citizen, and you think, oh, there's help, but we don't know when help's coming. Or how to access it. My understanding is that it is now at the state level, and that's part of what DHS has been doing, is to inform the federal government of how they would, within the state, we would utilize those funds. But they do, we are not able to access them directly from the federal government. They will come to the state level, and then the state will then disseminate based on the guidelines that they have. So we've been told that I think it was maybe like on April 2nd, there is some amount of funding that's going to flow through the community foundation through the department, which happened. That's how we were able to draw down dollars previously. But that process, we were told we would hear more in the coming, I think, 4 to 6 weeks, we were told. So we haven't heard yet, but I'm hopeful by this time in May, we'll at least know what kind of dollars those will look like. But in terms of money to actually pay people and provide care for children, it's still a ways away.
Okay, and I feel like I read something recently that gave me hope that that some of the money might be able to go to establishing new centers rather than only existing. Is that accurate?
I think there's a portion of that. There's also a portion that are really designated to, I mean, that's again, part of the problem is how it depends on where each of the stream of funding is coming from. So, anything that's coming through TANF funding, it's very, it's restricted on, it's really got to be child focused. So even though the infrastructure is critical, it can't go to that. So it depends on which bucket it's coming from as to where it could potentially flow. And also then who would be eligible from, kind of a household demographic income standpoint.
In terms of,
it is not clear.
In terms of giving parents money to pay for childcare rather than going to the centers, or?
Well, and that's how they do it. So the parents would get a voucher. The money doesn't flow through the parents. It still comes directly to the centers from the state, technically on the back end, but it's still considered parent support, if that makes sense.
And they have to get parent income data and stuff like that.
They have to be working, which right now has been a problem. We've got a number of moms who can't get a certificate because they don't have a job, but they can't get a job without childcare. So
Gotcha.
There's
Catch-22. All right, that's helpful. And keep us updated if they reach some decisions. Let us know.
Yes, I can definitely share. Like I say, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll get communications with details. So I can certainly forward those along when we get that.
Okay, sounds good. All right, anybody else want to chime in on that or the structure of the report?
I do think a part that we talked about, but maybe isn't yet reflected, is the piece about the codes.
Right. And I've done a little more research on that, and like I'm not finding much about like in terms of stuff like water fountains and stuff like that. But I am looking at I mean the biggest part, I think, or the biggest way that Nashville has that the Nashville / the council could impact the codes is more about land use and what's allowed in terms of like, you've got a spot, is it zoned? There's some properties that are zoned for daycare is what it says. It's the codes refer to it as daycare, not child, because I think the standards for adult care are the same in terms of zoning. So there's some that, some properties where all they have to do is go get a permit, and there's some where there are certain conditions, and maybe that's where that water fountain type thing falls in, but I'm seeing more stuff. The relevant stuff that I'm seeing is more about, what's next door, if, it's a residence next door, you have to have certain protections for noise in terms of like the playground area. You have to have either a fence, a fenced in area, or there's another one that kind of made me think that it could be a, like shrubbery type, like like a natural kind of fence.
Barrier,
That's not actually, yeah.
Are you protecting the neighbors or the children?
Well, I think the
I'm
fence
just wondering.
I think the fence protects the children. The shrubbery, I think, yeah, no, fair enough. Both, I think. Yeah, I mean, as it comes to making sure that you don't lose a kid, you know, making sure that there are
I'm all in
barriers.
favor of, yeah.
But there are also concerns about noise and, you know, basically, if in areas where there might be noise concerns and near single-family residences, you know, there's conditions that are stricter, basically. And it also depends on how many kids the daycare holds, and the larger it is, the more acreage you're supposed to have. You know, I know that the state has rules about number of kids in a classroom and number of adults per kid. That's state stuff. In Nashville, it's more about like acreage and square footage of the you know, building itself. And so the more kids, the more acreage you're expected to have. Like I want to say over 75, and you've got to have 2 acres, which is a pretty nice chunk of property. And then there's stuff about, and I'm kind of curious if this has been, those of you that are, you know, work in daycare centers or frequent them more than I do, other than going to pick up my wife every day, is driveway stuff. Like the larger, like it seems like the larger daycares, there's one type that has to have a circular driveway, and kind of implies that it has to be wide enough that cars can get through, kind of like a double lane, I guess, where you know, you can have one side for drop off, and then there's another, you know, cars don't have to sit there, but can kind of move around. And I think there's something that implies like the behavior of the drivers in terms of keeping things moving. And then there are others that are smaller that where it talks about like the location of the driveway. It doesn't have to be, for smaller ones, it doesn't have to be circular, but like it's supposed to be near the intersection, I think. So I'm curious if there are experiences where like driveways and drop-off plans and stuff like that have been a barrier to finding a good space. Anybody aware?
I am not, we do, ironically, don't really have any of those things at St. Luke's. So I'm wondering, we've also been operating, I mean, we've been in this location for over 100 years, so maybe we were grandfathered in along the way. And so where I could really see these issues being, or these situations being of issue, is if people were trying to expand. So I certainly think it could be critical. I have not personally dealt with those. I think that, you know, the number of parking, I remember from when I was with Fannie Battle, they had recently relocated to where they are in East Nashville. And I believe there was some issue with, you know, you do, to your point about even just space for handicap parking, you know, so it's not even just the drop off space. It's also having ample room for those other requirements. And not to say that those are things that could or would be not required, but to your point, as you were talking, I just thought, gosh, you know, it does require a decent amount of physical space to even have the outdoor space. So
Right.
I could see how those could be challenging if someone were trying to find a spot new.
Right. And I suspect that in terms of parking, like there's a zoning designation, not a use, but like, you know, for commercial, you're supposed to have so many spaces per square foot, or, you know, residential, multifamily residential, it's different. You know, and an office type building, it's supposed to be different. And I imagine that a lot of the parking is going to go with the zoning and not necessarily with the use, but the, since there's a drop off and pickup, the how that progresses and what physical structure there is for that to make sure, you're not backed up on the road like an elementary school near me does every morning. You don't know anything about that, do you, Christy?
Well, and thinking about Erica's point that like this is a, what is unique to Metro Council? Those of you all who know what restrictions are burdensome to especially maybe small or home-based care, what restrictions are burdensome that we can ask the Metro Council to change? Are there any? I know some are state level, but is there anything we want to put in this report like Metro Council, we need you to change this because this is too burdensome and it stands in the way?
And isn't going to severely jeopardize children's safety.
Right.
No, oh, go ahead. No, you go first, Erica.
I'm sure whatever you're going to say is a lot more interesting than what I was going to say. Okay, you go.
Okay, I'll go quick than you. Because I think you'll have a better idea of like especially the home-based, and I mean, so much of that is critical. I was just going to say the one thing that and this is the one that I think I had mentioned, I'm worried it's rooted in folklore or somewhere in bureaucracy, maybe I don't know that I'm right. When I tried to open a classroom like the Chambliss Center in Chattanooga, I was told by the state I couldn't because of Davidson County codes being different than Hamilton County codes. That is the one scenario that I've experienced that I was told was that. Now, that's been 4 years or so ago now, and maybe it really wasn't that. I do know that I have tried to license a site the same way as a site in Chattanooga, and I was not able to. So I can't say, I would hate to just assume and put that in there because maybe it was the state and they just didn't own it, or maybe the person telling me this didn't fully understand it, but that is a piece that I do know that I've been unable to do. And you hear a lot, I think, in Middle Tennessee about Chambliss Center because they have amazing work and reach in Chattanooga. And so it was frustrating that we could not replicate something that they have learned how to do really well that has met a need.
So do you know so you said classroom, so was it different from, so it was a part of a building?
Yes. And I think it could be even tied up where you mentioned the phrasing for Davidson County is whether it's not childcare, that it's daycare, so that it accounts for adults and children. The particular scenario that I was trying to work towards was to license a space within a school as through the state, so that's who we have to be licensed through, as a group. I think the wording, I'm going to look it up real quick, a group home provider, a site. The reason you would want to do that, the reason they do that in Chattanooga and Hamilton County is because it allows you a small quantity of children with a larger age range. So you can have one classroom and serve children from 6 weeks to basically they start kindergarten. We cannot do that at St. Luke's. You can't do that in any larger formal setting. But what that means is you can't just go in and have one class. You are required to go in then and have multiple classes, which obviously requires multiple amounts of, multiple resources, increased.
Right. I would think, now, I'm thinking out loud here. I'm not 100% sure of what I'm about to say, but like licensing sounds more like a state thing and permitting sounds more like a local thing, right? So Metro would be permitting the use in that space. So it might, if it relates to like what that building you were in or wanted to be in was, what it was zoned for, what use it was, and that could have restricted it. I doubt, I think if it was more about the wide age ranges, that sounds more to me like a state thing. Because state's going to be more, have more oversight or have the oversight in terms of staffing and numbers and stuff like that.
I agree. And I think that's really where we wanted to be licensed a certain way. But if I was understanding correctly, the city would not give the permit to the state for us to operate in that way.
Gotcha. So is it something you were saying that that they did that in Chattanooga and you were wanting to do it here and were told no? Okay.
Yes.
And you had a specific site that you were looking at doing it? Okay.
So is that something we could propose to change? Or-
Probably.
Okay.
We need to get our finger on it a little bit better. And and look at and make sure we understand the ramifications of it. If we, propose turning residential homes into 75 kid preschools, we're gonna have a lot of neighborhoods rise up
And say thank you.
Yeah. I would hope.
And then Erica, you had something too.
Oh, yeah.
What was
Well, I was going to share specifically on the piece around home-based childcare in MDHA properties, right? So it's kind of particular within a larger context of home-based care. But right now, we're actually going through a longer-term process with MDHA to really understand what are the needs to be able to meet codes and licensing requirements for MDHA properties. The reality is, so for example, we're piloting in Cumberland View, and the housing, MDHA, the quality of housing has to be drastically improved in order to be able to meet some of the codes and licensing standards. And so actually we're going through a longer term process with MDHA to be able to identify, what are the funds that are required, what are the specific updates that we have to make to homes so they can actually meet both codes and licensing requirements. And so, we will not have that piece ready in the next month. That's going to be a longer term process that we're going through together. But we definitely could reference the need, to look in that. I have a list of suggestions from All Our Kin. Again, that is the national advocacy group and family care network. They have a really great kind of list of what can state and local governments do to make home-based childcare more accessible. And so I could, you reference that information in the document that we share as a starting point, but there definitely will have to be, at least in terms of when we think about equity, and we think about access, and we think about our families living in MDHA, we're going to have to make some investments, financial investments in improving that quality of housing there.
And I did just look up the exact wording to be sure how those chamberless sites are licensed. So they are, the provider type is what the state calls it. They are licensed as a group home care for 8 to 12 children. And so what that allows is, if you look at their capacity and their minimum and maximum age ranges, they're able to serve between 6 weeks and 5 years in that one site between that 8 to 12 children. And I believe that 8 to 12 depends on ages, probably space too. I can't remember exactly, but that is the type of license I was trying to get, and I was told that we could not. And when I said, why can't I? Because you licensed in Chattanooga for that, I was told it was something to do with Metro Code. So that, if that is in fact true, that could be something that could really allow extra small pilot almost sites, because I think the problem is you have to go in, if you have to go in bigger, it's a bigger investment. But you can't, or don't want to open a site that you can only serve children 6 weeks through 30 months. And then you say, I'm sorry, I can't, because I can't put them, I don't have another place to put them, you know, that then there's a gap in care. That's already the problem as we see that transition between early care, that pre-K age range, and then kindergarten. And so part of what you really want is to make sure you have that continuity for children.
Yeah, I'll look into the designation of group home care. I was more looking at daycare, but I think now that you mention it, group home care is a designation. And like I said, I doubt that they're going to have language that talks about ages, but are going to have language about like square footage or acreage or something like that.
And I don't know if it's, you know, a group home. You know, years ago I worked in youth in custody, and so group home from that instance was people that were, it was a residential. So it, you know, is that a part of it from a Metro Code standpoint? You know, so it's that group home language. I agree that it was something to do with that as to what that could look like in Davidson County.
Okay. Yeah, they're on the zoning code, they're like all the different uses, like say at the top, which would be like residential, commercial, office, you know, industrial, and then on the side there are the different uses, and so it's going to have, you know, like daycare home, daycare institutional, daycare, and then group home, and then it's going to go across and say, you know, if that use is allowed in that zone. And in some cases, they're allowed with conditions, and that's where it gets tricky. Like it might be allowed in residential, but there have to be conditions like a fence or a round drive or a circular driveway or something like that. And so that's definitely something that council has a purview over, the use designations.
I wonder, Melanie, do you happen to know any of the details related to the East End Prep and Nashville Classical arrangement with Fanny Battle? Because it feels like
So that's
they're
actually
doing a similar thing, right?
So I started that work with them, and actually that was the scenario of where I tried to license it that way.
Okay.
They're as off-site. So originally where it landed at was at Fanny Battle because we had this same problem. So we would have had to have licensed an entire separate as a childcare provider. And so ultimately what we ended up doing just to meet the need of their educators was to turn a classroom at our existing location, which is close by, into an additional classroom. But we had the same issue that I talked about of we're limited in that setting, and in a childcare formal setting, you're limited to the ages you can put together. So it was not as complete an offering as we would have wanted and what we were trying to model out of Chattanooga.
Okay.
That's how we got around it, is because we did it within our existing facility, which was already a licensed childcare provider as the site itself.
Okay. So it is when they talk about I've found a news article, and when they're talking about the classroom's actually at Fanny Battle. It's not at East End or Nashville Classical right now. Okay.
Yes. And this was all part of that process of trying to get, you know, Mr. LaCrone had a classroom that he wanted us to come in and provide care out of, and ultimately we couldn't do that. So
right, it's a big campus there. So yes.
Right. So yes, so when that article, the Tennessean did an amazing story about it, and that's really what happened. Is we said, okay, well we took away our teacher's workroom. There were no other spaces, but we turned it into an additional classroom.
All right.
All right, so kind of returning back to the report, which will include recommendations. Who's up for writing? And I'll add that, like, if we can start getting drafts of this, and even if it's in like kind of the two sections of here's where we are and here's some suggestions or ways that community can impact, I can help, turn or text or format it and work on the consistencies in between the different sections so that they don't look all that different. But would like for others to kind of provide the content that we've been talking about, the background and I can do the codes piece. And once we have once we have it, I think I can do an once we have the different sections, I don't want to write the introduction before I know where it's, exactly where it's going. So once we have the different sections, I can do like an executive summary at the beginning, an introduction.
And I know Lisa, it's unfortunate that she's not here because I think she has some interest in helping write this.
It should be good too.
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk with her later today and see. And I know if she's in, let me pull up my different groups. She's in the expand home-based care opportunities and micro centers, networks for existing centers, centers in high schools. She's not in.
She's in the data group.
Okay. And Erica, you can write about MDHA and expanding opportunities for their residents. Whoops. And then Shooty, you can work on the leveraging private sector, nonprofit, and church resources to find facilities. And then data section, right? Okay. And then employers to provide access to childcare. Christy and Amy are in that. I have.
Mm-hmm.
And then community benefits agreements. Oh, we're almost out of time, but I did want to say that I had a phone conversation with some lobbyists with Oracle, and definitely spent a good third of my time with them talking about the need for childcare and kind of what's Oracle's history on that. And they basically what I was told is that he doesn't recall, one of them didn't recall like childcare centers in the facilities, but that they partner with childcare centers close by. And when he said partner, I said, does that mean help subsidize? And he said, yes. But I have that on their radar. I don't know that that's something that we can, what's going to be before us is more about, physical infrastructure, although it's including a park and a pedestrian bridge. But I think we can get at least some dialogue and commitments out of them. I don't know that it will, the nuts and bolts will go through council, but they know that it's something that's important to me. And somebody else, I don't know if it was Berkeley, but they said somebody else had asked them the same thing. So I'm going to stay on them about that. And can write about community benefits agreements as something that council can insist on or can insist on as if we make any deals with companies. And this is less a CBA, less community benefits than I think it's a pretty good deal in terms of they're going to, they're good at partnering with historically Black colleges and universities, and they're good at going to high schools and getting computer technology and software design, at the high school level, if not below. The deal is, I think, pretty good in terms of they're going to pay for $175 million of infrastructure and then just not pay us $175 million out of at least $350 million, over 25 years. So it's not like we're borrowing money to do that infrastructure. Anyway, we're going to learn more about that. I didn't want to get off track, but I did want you to know that I have been talking to them about childcare, and those 8,500 employers, plenty of them are going to have kids and need some daycare access.
Yeah.
And so I can work on that. All right. Does anybody want to recommend a good deadline for having drafts that Lisa and I can then go through? And I'll talk to her later about that. But I mean, we've kind of got all, I think we've got all the, if not at least most of our details. We just got to get it down on paper. Like I said, if it's easier for folks to like make bullet lists that we can then transition to something else, to more of a prosaic text, I'm happy to help with that.
One piece that I just kind of, would love to add is that as we are writing this report, or as we're kind of putting information in the different sections, and once we compile the information together, I would encourage, everyone to ask themselves questions about, the suggestions that you're making, the information that you're offering, and how does it reflect the very real needs of Nashville to think about equity and racial justice and healing in our city. One of the things that guides my work in childcare and early childhood education is the fact that in MNPS currently, we have deep inequities around, especially experiences for Black children, right, in our K through 12 setting. And we know that childcare is a big part of that, and early childhood education is a big part of that. So I hope that our report doesn't have like a neutral tone and just thinks like one childcare spot is a great childcare spot, but how can we be really explicit and like center the needs of communities who've been harmed and marginalized and left behind?
Christy, as you all have been looking at data, is there, I don't doubt I don't doubt what you're saying at all. I don't mean that, but do we have data to point to say, here's a problem with, equity and diversity, and then here's some suggestions of what we can do with it. In other words, I want to.
We have some neighborhood maps that talk specifically about the number of sites by zip code. What we don't have, but Lisa was going to try and backtrack through the one of the earlier Tennessee reports to see if she could find out the information, is how many children are living in those zip codes who might need care. So the trouble we're having making the link is, if you're going in specific by neighborhood, then what's the need? Go ahead.
I think by zip code, that data should be easy to find.
Numbers of children?
In terms of racial and ethnic background, in terms of income level.
Yes, we did. I mean, we pulled the I wonder, can I share my screen? Does that help?
Yeah. While you're pulling your screen up, please excuse me. I'm gonna have to hop off. I've got a meeting that started a minute ago, and so I'm gonna need to hop off. Let me know how I can support in terms of the report writing, and I'm used the word support. That's what I mean. But I'm happy to do what I can and look forward to hearing about our next time to connect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank
And
you,
excuse
Belva.
me for leaving early.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. There's somebody from IT on, because they would have to let you share.
Cash, it's Rosie. I'm running the show today. So
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Lewis need to present.
Plumber.
Ms. Plum.
I'm sorry, I made the wrong. I'll make you a presenter so you can share your screen. Okay, you should have presenter rights.
Okay. Oh, you know what? It may not in my
Well,
work world.
And while you're looking for that, Melanie, I think just put in the chat the same thing I was thinking about. That Child Desert interactive map has a lot of this. It has like the income in those neighborhoods and the number of preschoolers, and it's amazing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, so it
Okay.
looks like with this computer that I'm on, I can't,
Okay.
it requires a lot of system preferences choices that I'm not authorized to make.
Okay. Do you want to, is it something
could
you can
send
send
us a
send a
link.
link?
Yes, I can actually just send you, I started to send the file earlier and then got distracted. Let's see, hang on. Talk amongst yourselves.
Well, maybe you could even just email it to everybody.
Yeah.
Is it something you could send?
That's what they are the kind of notes that we have so far, and I just need to get to that spot. So one moment.
And Berkeley has pointed out, she's on, but has texted me a few things. She's put some notes in the Google Doc and just wants us to know that Metro Schools does also have geographic information on children.
Oh, great. And do we just reach out to Metro Council to get that?
Well, it should be
Sorry to,
public, or the school board.
yeah,
I can do that. But let's see what we've got, because it might be, all coming from the same source.
okay. All right, that's it about. All right. So I just sent something that said notes, not very specifically, but
Okay.
to the email address that we all had before. And I know already, Melanie, I'm going to need to correct the part at the bottom about on-site childcare or actually, no, I didn't go out on a limb and say it was at the charter school. So anyway, when you open the document, it compiles information from the Tennessee Child Care Agency. But then if you go at the bottom part of the first page, it takes the Davidson County zip codes with the highest percentage of families experiencing poverty and outlines the distribution of registered providers.
Okay, cool. Nice. Wow. Yeah.
So, but again, also you almost without calling each of those people, it's really hard to tell just from this level of data, like how many spots do they actually have in their place, right? So we know what age it begins, and we know how many providers are providing care for a certain age child, but we don't know without doing a lot of cross-referencing what's the size of each center.
Gotcha. And in terms of capacity or number of children, like it's probably been pretty up and down the last year.
Right. So
All right.
anyway, it's a place to start. It's not the
Yeah. Looks good. I want to make sure that we don't go over too long. Especially we've lost a couple of people.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna talk to Lisa and work with her on an action plan, and just those that are kind of in those different groups, especially if Lisa's not in it, work on that draft.
okay. Did we have a deadline for
No,
writing?
we didn't. What's a good one?
Somebody else choose.
Today is the 21st. Why don't we say, huh?
Go ahead.
By the end of the month, like by next Friday? Is that too
The
short or too
30th?
long? Huh?
That feels a little tight for me just because some other deadlines I have, but
Okay, how
that may
about
not be true for everybody else.
what's the next Wednesday?
The 5th,
Yeah,
that feels
that feels
reasonable.
good.
Right.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
All
Are
right,
we going to
sounds
try to
good.
meet or just send stuff?
I think, actually, can we say, why don't we say the 4th? And then if we meet on the 5th, we kind of have it to talk about.
That
Okay.
sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Right.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.